the Villainous Lord, as he was known, it's not my title, Sir Thomas Maryon Wilson, who at the age of 21 inherited the 8th Baronet of Eastbourne. He was also Lord of the Manor of Hampstead and the Lord of the Manor of Charlton. Here was his little house. His father died in 1821, and his father had some foresight and prevented his son in the will from doing anything which would result in the heath being diminished. So he wasn't allowed to sell it, and he wasn't allowed to grant leases longer than 21 years. In the 19th century, London was expanding massively rapidly. All around London, from Berkhamsted in the north to Crewe in the south to Epping in the east to Wimbledon in the west, common land, was being gobbled up by the landlords, the lords of the manor, being enclosed. Then they would go to Parliament, where other lords of the manor would give them retrospective permission, removing the tenants who were occupying it and their rights in the process. At the time, Hampstead Heath was used by commoners. Commoners were not anybody. They were people who lived in the neighbourhood and often lived on the land. They had access rights and they could use the soil, the sand, the water. They could use the land for grazing. And here, a cottage industry in laundry grew up, and it's said that from London, if you look towards Hampstead, it looked like a snow-capped mountain because of all of the sheets that were being dried from the hotels and the large big houses in London. And they could use the water for free until 1821, when Sir Thomas decided to charge them for using that resource, and also to charge local people, builders and others who were taking sand from the heath for building purposes. He decided that they would no longer have access to that for free. This is what it looked like at the time. Beautiful. Arms and railers. Next slide, please. So the battle for Hampstead Heath became emblematic for the entire country. So this was a sort of flagship, if you like. And whenever there was a debate about land enclosure and development in Parliament, rarely was that debate held without Hampstead Heath being referenced. It was an incredibly important area of land. And the preservation of it became a cause célèbre. Here are some of the heroes. Sir Arthur Crosfield is nominated in one of these books here as the person most responsible, and there is a little fountain to him up near Kenwood with a natural spring coming out of it. And then these people who went on to found the RSPCA, the NSPCC, Commons Preservation Society, the National Trust, and so on and so forth. This really was the beginning, perhaps, of local conservation and an awareness of the value of nature. And Hampstead Heath was known as the lungs of London. But Sir Thomas was determined. He'd inherited lots of land and baronets and titles, but no money. And he wanted to exploit the land for what it could bring him. And he tried again and again and again and again and again and again. In total, I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 that are mentioned there, but I think in total there were 14 different attempts by him to get round his father's will, by getting Parliament to grant him rights that his father had denied him. The first one only came to light, he was very sneaky. The first one only came to light when he prematurely started to develop land. And then people said, what's he doing? And they looked at the bill that he presented in Parliament, and he'd sneaked in some tiny clauses that would effectively give him carte blanche. And they were not obvious until some experts started to look at it. But just out of curiosity, yes, here you see, this is Southhill Park, but you'll see there is no Parliament Hill, there's no Nassington Road, and there's none of the estate down here leading down to Mansfield Road, the Estelle Roads or any of those are there. And this was 1840, I think, and within 10 years all of that had been developed. So the heath was being gradually nibbled by developers. And this was the plan that Sir Thomas came up with. He basically wanted to build the equivalent of Bishop's Avenue on the Heath. And the first thing he developed was the viaduct, which was going to be part of the main thoroughfare. And off the thoroughfare would be, I think it's 28, where written down there? 28 houses, 28 villas, equivalent to the sort of thing that you now see on Bishop's Avenue. This was the first thing he built. It's built on inappropriate land. So it took him 3 attempts, 3 years, and all his spare cash to complete it in 1845. And that was the first part. So the road would be a grand road for all these grand houses. Now this is a lovely cartoon. London's going out of town, the march of the bricks and mortar. And it was literally, everybody was flooding into London. There was massive poverty, there were the Corn Laws, and industrialisation, the Industrial Revolution was taking a hold. The jobs were in London, there was a massive influx of Londoners coming in, and they were also being expelled from the common land and the rural areas. So they flocked to London, and there was this huge demand for housing, and that's why you wanted to cash in on. And see, you have the brickworks and the bricks flying out into the countryside, filling the haystacks. And this is, by the way, the Heath only exists, interesting fact, 450,000 years ago. There was a river that ran from Oxfordshire right through the south of England. It was as big as the Ganges, massive, and it deposited sand, and that's why the Heath exists. Essentially it's a sandbank from that giant river. And the sand is a very good quality. So London brick, which has a distinct yellow, for any brick aficionados here, there are some people who, believe it or not, collect bricks. London brick is a distinct yellow colour, and the sand is of very high quality, and it was to be found on the Heath. Underneath it you have London clay, and in between you have a mixture of the two called clay gate beds. So what happens is the water comes down here, it springs when it hits less permeable clay gate. By the time it reaches London clay, it's running to the water, it's running over land. So water was a powerful and important resource. So having been repeatedly rebuffed by Parliament, but mainly by the people of Hampstead, your predecessors, time and time again, Sir Thomas, who was a nasty piece of work really, decided that he was going to stick 2 fingers up at the community and spoil the Heath for them, ruin it. And so he started digging sand for the bricks, 1 million bricks a week, huge amounts of sand. These are big 7 stories tall, these buildings. And the best example is if you drive along Spaniards Road from Hampstead to the Spaniards Inn, it's on a sort of causeway. On both sides, the land drops away. It never used to do that. It used to be flat. You dug out everything on both sides. And this was a sand quarry, and this one is beautiful. This is a brickworks. And so people would like to come and picnic, as they did. People would come up from London on weekends and Sundays and bank holidays in huge numbers.
That's the viaduct at the back.
That's the viaduct at the back. This is the brickworks at the front. It went from being, Hampstead Heath went from being the lungs of London to being choked with smog and brickwork fumes and a health hazard. This is the Heath extension, Wilds Farm. Wilds Farm was painted lots of times, different eras. This one was painted by John Wood in situ, and it's where William Blake lived. So some lovely heritage here that's worthy of preservation. Now, thankfully, he dies in 1869. He had, in 1866, decided on his final strategy, which was to wear down residents at Hampstead. And he was going to do that by what would now be called lawfare, I suppose. He was going to basically try and drain the energy and the money of Hampstead who were opposing him. And it was a long battle that he had in mind, and the people of Hampstead, and particularly those who had money, like Lord Mansfield and people in Widdenhurst and in Athlone House, they had the resources to match him, but it was going to be a long battle, but he died. he was saved really by his death. And 2 years later, his son John inherited it. His son, actually he was opposed not only by the people of Hampstead, he was also opposed by his own family. And his son John, as soon as he inherited the title, Lord of the Manor of Hampstead, he gave it back to the people. He sold it, but he stopped trying to develop it, and he said, yes, you can have it. And the result was the Hampstead Heath Act of 1871, which said that it should be preserved and not be manicured, of that phrase. At that point in time, the heath, which was mostly the land to the north of Hampstead and to the north of Spaniards Road, as well as the land around Kenwood and Kenwood Woods and Sandy Heath, what we now know as West Heath, and the Vale of Health. That was the kind of area that was the heath and going further north. What we now know as Parliament Hill was farmland, not really part of the heath at all. So it shrunk from 500 acres at the beginning of the 19th century down to 220 acres. It's now 800 acres. So this was the area that remained when Sir Thomas died, and then slowly but surely different parts were acquired. Guess by who? Public subscription. It was the people of Hampstead, and in each of these acquisitions, the largest contribution comes from public subscription. It's the people of Hampstead saying, we want to keep our land, and we're willing to put our hands in our pockets to get it. So these different 200 acres acquired, 60 acres acquired, 36, 80, and it grew to 616 and continued to expand. It's now 780 acres. And here's the development as it grew, but you can see there's stages of development. 1871 to 1889 to 1928. Now this one shows how the different patches of land, like a patchwork quilt, how the heath was gradually grown, added to, piece by piece. It's a difficult slide to see because it's busy in black and white, so the next one is in colour. This was Lord Ivy, who bequeathed Kenwood Estate, now run by English Heritage. And here we have the 36 acres that was acquired for £38,000, 240 acres here at Parliament Hill for 300,000. All just a patchwork quilt that's gradually grown and is now the thing that we love, and for which Hampstead is known throughout the world. Next. Here it is, in all its glory. That's where I now live. My landlord is English Heritage, and I'm a stable boy now. And here's Kenwood, and this is looking south into London. And you can see the Highgate ponds on the left.
Did they have to fight for each bit of land that was saved? When you say it expanded, did they have to fight each time?
Yes.
So each time they added a bit, everybody, it's like there's a whole group of people.
Every single acquisition is a campaign. And it's a determined campaign that engages lots of people working together to prevent very crafty developers from doing what you're about to hear is happening in the Magdala and had happened already, if you think about it, Jack Straw's Castle is a pub, no longer. We lost land as well as gaining it. Whittenhurst Gardens. Denzil Edward Budget Meakin is the father of Catherine Budget Meakin, who used to run the Highgate Society. And when I moved into the stables, I joined the Highgate Society, and she rang me up and said, "Who are you?" and invited me for a lovely cup of tea and a chat. He more or less died fighting. This is an answer to your question. He more or less killed himself through exhaustion, fighting to save what is now, is it a prize? Is it called? Yes, the area in front of Whittenhurst Gardens, which is now developed and lost. But in his honour is a copse, which is on the Highgate side behind here, near the cemetery. So 6 oak trees planted in his honour called Dennison's Copse. That one was saved. These two, Wittenhurst House and Athlone House, are now owned by oligarchs, I think. And now we have the Magdalen, which is facing the same kind of pressure that did for Wittenhurst Gardens, which did for Jacksborough Castle, and nearly did for the Heath. The top 2 floors, as you'll hear, have already gone, they've already been developed. The first floor was a function room, and the bottom floor was a pub. Planning Commission was denied, but he did it anyway. And now, retrospectively, just like all the other landlords in the 19th century, they go to Parliament, or they go to the council, and they ask for retrospective permission to do what they've already done. I think that's, yeah.
Shouldn't it be rescinded?
Well, of course it should.
Oh.
But I shall hand over.
I'm really struck by the persistence that was required to development of the Heath. The defence has to win every time, and the assaults keep coming back and back, and you've got to win every time, because you lose once and it's gone. Thank you so much. Any questions for Martin?
Is there a book of yours that incorporates this?
Sorry, that?
Have you put this into a book or something that we can?
No, but I've got it out of books, and here's a selection. That's how my sources are here.
Is there a book you recommend?
Well, I think A Walker's Guide to Hampstead Heath
Yes,
is really
fantastic.
easy to read, and it's pretty thorough.
Yeah.
You could read this in a day. It's a really good source.
And do the walks.
If you want chapter and verse, this one by Helen Lawrence, it'll take a bit longer to read, but it's the full history.
Martin pointed out to me that we have in our very own road a contemporary example of an enclosure. It's the Magdalen Tavern. I've got a personally very special relationship with the pub, because I'd never been a pub person until I discovered it being run by its former landlords, Christian and Alex. And I discovered it as a community space. It's like a public sitting room in the street. I could go in there for dinner and be confident of being greeted by name and finding somebody I knew already in there. And then my story tonight starts in December 2013. This might not be something you have heard of, but before putting in a planning application, you can ask for and pay for advice, pre-application advice from Camden's planning department. And somebody asked, oh, what about turning the whole building into residential usage? And Camden basically sent them off with a flea in their ear, saying no way. That was the pre-application advice. In early 2014, a former tax lawyer from Tel Aviv, Ori Khalif, purchased Magdalen as part of, with 5 other pubs from Punch Taverns. And he put in an application to convert the top floors into flats. He promised us lovely things, and not everybody believed him, because I think it was SEGA, the South End Green Association, applied to register the pub as an asset of community value, to put some protections on it, which prompted an email from one of Mr. Khalif's associates, which I've never published, but I kept it because I don't get emails like this very often, and I doubt you do. Stephen, please see, this is from a man called Matan Amitai, who was then an associate, no longer is, I understand. Stephen, please see below, please call to discuss. If this is the case, we are not going to work with the community and make sure that the pub will be closed. My plan is to keep Magdalen Public House as a pub, but if this procedure will continue, we will keep the pub closed for many years. The community did a big mistake by making this application, because I was planning to continue the business and invest to make it a great business. I'm happy to speak, but not willing to compromise. We didn't take any loan, and I'm happy to keep this building vacant for a long, long time. I'm going to do whatever I need to make sure that the community asset will not be approved. I really don't want to go in this route, but if need, I am ready for it. Well, it's fair to say he gave us warning that this would be a long fight.
What was the date of that, Stephen?
That is 2014, 14th of August. The Porritt brothers, the Stag in Fleet Road and the Notting Hill Tavern, appeared as landlords at the Magdala, the Winchester and the Albert, all three pubs part of this parcel bought from Punch Taverns, and then put in the planning applications to convert part of the pubs to flats, a rather unusual arrangement, and the pub tenant asked to convert part of the building to flats. 2015 saw the illegal demolition of the Carlton Tavern in Carlton Vale. This happened the weekend before the heritage listing was due to come into effect. An article later that year in Time Out described how a local resident, a Hebrew speaker, approached Khalif and his associates who were standing in the street talking in Hebrew, and joining in the conversation, she heard that he expected to get a fine of a few £1,000s and nothing more to happen. To its credit, Westminster City Council eventually compelled him to rebuild it brick by brick. You can read an article about this in Wikipedia, but we're hoping that Camden will show some spine and support us in a similar way. The Porritt brothers disappeared almost overnight in February 2016. Inquiries about the sale of the flats which had been made came to nothing. Nobody seemed to actually want to sell them. An application to convert the function room to a third flat was denied in 2018. Inquiries about the pub, which had remained closed since the Porritt brothers left, ran into nothing. The Friends of the Magdala found a suitable tenant who was interested, willing to pay the rent and so forth, but couldn't get answers. The Friends of the Magdala had consulted the Plunkett Foundation, charity that helps communities establish businesses, and they were quite enthusiastic about the Magdala's prospects and thought about a community buyout. And at that point, somewhere before 2020, Camden officers suggested a compulsory purchase order under the Localism Act of 2011, which you can do for a derelict building. Then shortly after that suggestion, the pub reopened with Dickie Morgan as its landlord, and a leaked email showed that the letting agents had told him that support for further residential conversions was a condition of his tenancy. We understand that wouldn't be enforceable, but it shows you that the long game of conversion is still in progress. In 2024, we, the Forum, made a formal complaint that the first floor function room, which had remained closed since 2014, had been converted to a flat despite planning permission being denied, and had actually been let out to a tenant. Oracle filed a planning application for retrospective permission. I shouldn't have done it, but maybe you'll let me get away with it. Early last year, his agent announced that they would consider a community bid, first for the function room and a little later for the entire building. That triggered a 6-month moratorium on sale under the Localism Act because it was an asset of community value. The Friends of the Magdala found a prospective buyer but found that they could not visit the premises. The 6-month moratorium expired, beginning a 12-month period in which the asset of community value registration is basically moot. The Forum has requested enforcement from Camden Planning, but learned that the retrospective planning application still hadn't been decided. We rather thought that it had been denied. Earlier this year, a Camden Planning officer recommended grant of the retrospective planning application, that you should be allowed to keep this flat. Following quite a local fuss, that application was not approved as according to the planning officer's report, but referred to the full planning committee, to which it will come in the coming weeks. Now, when it comes, the forum will submit a closely argued objection, which will be restricted to the grounds which will survive a possible appeal. So much of what you heard tonight simply won't be mentioned in that, because it won't stand as grounds for refusal, whatever I or you think of it. However, you are personally free to write to the members of the planning committee if you wish, and tell them what you think about what you heard tonight. And I have a stack here of the names of the planning committee and their email addresses, which you are welcome to help us out. I want to say a word about what developers call unlocking value. 10 years ago or more, this pattern of buying up a North London hub and flipping it to residential was quite popular before the councils called on to what was going on. In that time, developers would speak about taking a building like this and unlocking value. It appears that by removing these planning restrictions, they magically made the building more valuable. If the entire mantle of the building, for example, was sold as a single occupancy home, one supposes it would go for something like £6 to £8 million. Now, when we consulted the Plunkett Foundation about its value, they said, oh, freehold, that was about 10 years ago, about 900k, plus another £500,000 was a London premium. Even then, that's a substantial discount below the market price of the building. And the reason that you could pick up the pub for such a surprisingly low part price was because of the usage restriction. If you ask any estate agent about the value of an amenity to the price of a house, recently a group of my members were in a dispute about what price to reinsure the building for. They've been told that it would cost £500,000 to rebuild it from scratch if the whole thing just burned down. This building's worth £5 million. Surely we should insure it for £5 million. But of course, a much bigger premium. What explains the difference between the cost of building it and its actual value on the market? It's the location, as any estate agent will tell you, and the value of the location is from the amenity. You've got a heath, you've got nice shops, you've got cafes, you've got people like you. There's bus lines, tram lines. One of them is the pub, and part of that is the pub's function room. So, the point that I'm reaching for here is that the value that is, so to speak, subtracted from the market price of the building is dispersed among residents' homes. Everybody has a bit of it. And the unlocking of value is not creating money out of thin air, it's taking it from our homes. They're turning it into private property. Thank you for hearing me out. Well, unsurprisingly, it's the property of the company which is being registered here and there and so forth. I've got a detailed analysis if you're interested.